The first thing I remember wasn't the pain. It was the sound of their laughter bouncing off the narrow stairwell like it belonged there, like it was part of the building. The back stairs at the Maplewood Inn were steep and old, painted the color of skim milk, and that morning they smelled sharp and clean from the lemony disinfectant I'd just used downstairs. I was 52, widowed 6 years, and I lived alone in a small apartment 10 minutes from work, the kind with thin walls and a view of the parking lot. I had my canvas tote on one shoulder, a stack of folded napkins in my arms, and my employee badge swinging on its lanyard against my chest when my heel slid on a wet edge of paint. My foot went forward, my body went backward, and I saw the ceiling light flash like a camera bulb before I hit. I heard Tessa, our operations manager, all shiny hair and clipped voice, say, "Oh my God, she wiped out." And then the giggles came. They laughed when I fell down the stairs. And as I lay there, staring at my badge twisted sideways like a little crooked name tag on a corpse, I remember thinking very calmly, if they can laugh right now, what else have they been laughing at? The Maplewood Inn wasn't a real hotel in the corporate sense. It was a historic bed and breakfast in a small Pennsylvania town that liked to pretend it was still 1957 when the sidewalks were swept and the women wore lipstick to buy bread. The inn itself was gorgeous from the outside. White clapboard, deep green shutters, hanging ferns, and a wrap-around porch with rocking chairs that always looked better in photos than they did in real life. Guests came for weddings, anniversaries, fall foliage weekends, little escapes from their own messy kitchens. Inside, if you stood in the front parlor where the quilts were folded just so and the antique radio played soft jazz, you could almost believe the place ran on charm. But if you worked there, if you carried laundry up the back stairs, if you scrubbed bathrooms, if you set out breakfast trays at dawn, you knew it ran on people like me, women who showed up early, kept our heads down, and said no problem when it absolutely was a problem. I started there part-time after my husband Michael died. Back then, I told myself I wanted something to do, something that wasn't just sitting with grief like it was a second person in my living room. Maybe you've been there too. When the quiet after loss gets so loud, you'll take any noise just to break it. The inn hired me as breakfast prep, then front desk coverage on weekends, then whatever needs doing, which is how jobs turn into whole lives without anyone ever announcing the change. My badge arrived in the mail 2 weeks after I started. It was cheap plastic in a clear sleeve, my photo taken against the kitchen's beige wall, my name, Linda Hart, printed in bold. I remember standing at my sink that night, the lanyard looped over my fingers, and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not pride exactly, but a small, steadying sense that I still belonged somewhere in the world. Michael used to tease me about it. "Look at you," he'd say, tapping the badge with one knuckle when it swung against my sweater. "Official." He'd say it like it was a compliment, like it meant I was still me and not just the woman who had to learn how to sleep alone. That badge became part of my routine. The first thing I clipped on at 5:30 a.m., the last thing I took off when I got home. It was an everyday object, the kind you stop noticing, until it's suddenly the only thing you can see. The morning I fell, the building was half awake. The kitchen was warm, humming with the big refrigerator motor, and the old floorboards creaked under my sneakers. I'd already cracked eggs, stirred batter, set out the fruit bowl, and refilled the little jars of jam that guests always stole. The inn's owner, Mr. Delaney, liked to say we were a family, which usually meant he expected you to do favors without asking questions. Tessa liked to say we were a team, which meant she expected you to do favors while she watched. She was 30-something, always in fitted blazers even on Saturdays, and she had a way of speaking to older women that was half sweetness and half scolding, like we were toddlers with car keys. "Linda, honey," she'd say, drawing out the word honey the way you might draw out a yawn. "You've got to be quicker on those turnovers. Guests don't want to wait." Or, "Linda, you didn't reset the parlor pillows the way I showed you. Did you forget?" I wasn't forgetful. I was tired. There's a difference. And if you're a woman around my age, you probably know exactly what I mean. Being tired can make you move carefully, think twice, double-check things. Being forgetful is what people accuse you of when they want to take your choices away. That morning, Tessa had asked me to bring up a stack of clean napkins and a tray of mugs to the second-floor linen closet, because the bridal party was coming early, and we can't look unprepared. I'd gone down to the basement storage to grab extra supplies. The basement stairs were fine. It was the back staircase between the kitchen and the upstairs hallway. That was the problem. The paint on the steps had worn slick in spots, and the handrail wobbled if you put real weight on it. We'd complained quietly, the way workers complain when they don't want to be labeled difficult. Mr. Delaney always said he'd get to it, and Tessa always said, "Just be careful," as if careful could fix a building, as if careful was a substitute for basic safety. I was careful. I was always careful. I took those stairs sideways sometimes, like a crab, one hand on the railing, one hand balancing whatever I carried. But that day the steps were damp. Someone, maybe me, maybe Marcia from housekeeping, had mopped the landing and not put out the yellow caution sign, because the caution sign had been broken for months and never replaced. When my heels slid, it wasn't dramatic at first. It was just a tiny betrayal of friction. Then the whole world tipped. I remember my tote strap yanking against my shoulder, the napkins lifting like white birds, the sharp smack of my hip against an edge, and then my back hitting 2 steps in a row, like a drum beat. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't praying. I wasn't even screaming. I was doing that instinctive thing where your body tries to curl into itself to protect what matters. My wrist bent under me, and I heard a wet little pop, not a crack, just wrongness. Then I landed hard at the bottom, and everything went still except my badge, swinging and swinging until it slowed. Tessa and 2 of the younger staff were at the top of the stairs. One of them, I think it was Zach from the front desk, had a hand over his mouth like he couldn't help it. Tessa did that quick half-step forward and then stopped, as if deciding whether helping me would be an inconvenience. "Linda," she called, and her voice had that bright edge it got when she was trying to sound compassionate in front of an audience. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Before I could answer, before I could even sit up, Zach let out a laugh. Not a cruel belly laugh, not a villain laugh, something worse. A reflexive, nervous laugh, the kind people do when they don't know how to handle discomfort. Then someone else snorted. Then Tessa actually giggled, a small sound like I'd tripped over a toy in a sitcom. "I'm sorry," she said, still smiling. "It's just, are you serious right now?" I lay there and felt heat climb up my neck, not just from pain but from shame. The stairwell was tight, painted too many times, the air heavy with that lemon cleaner, and the humiliation filled it up like steam. I tried to sit up, and my wrist screamed. My hip throbbed. My back felt like someone had pressed a hot iron to it. "I need a minute," I said, and my voice sounded thin to my own ears. Tessa finally came down, stepping carefully, as if the stairs were suddenly dangerous when they involved her. She crouched beside me, and I noticed her perfume, something floral and expensive, mixing with the cleaning chemical smell. "Can you stand?" she asked, like that was the only measure of whether I was hurt. "Maybe I should call an ambulance," Zach said, but his eyes were wide in that panicky way, and he didn't move. Tessa waved her hand. No, we don't need to make a big thing," she said. "Linda, come on, you're fine. You just slipped." She put her hand under my elbow and tried to pull me up too quickly. Pain shot through my wrist and I gasped. "Wait," I said. "Wait, please." Tessa's face tightened, the smile flattening. "We have guests arriving in an hour," she murmured close to my ear, like my injury was a scheduling conflict. "Try to breathe." Maybe you've sat in a moment like that too, hurt in one way, embarrassed in another, and aware that the people around you care more about how it looks than how you feel. I managed to stand, shaking, and the room tilted for a second. My badge slapped against my chest as I moved, and I had this absurd thought. My name is still right there. They can see I'm a person. Tessa marched me into the kitchen and sat me on a stool like she was parking a piece of equipment. "Ice!" she snapped at Zach, "and get the incident form." The incident form was a single sheet of paper kept in a drawer under the office printer, usually used when a guest dropped a wine glass and cut a finger. While Zach fumbled with the ice, Tessa leaned in. "Linda," she said softly, "I need you to be honest with me. Were you wearing appropriate shoes?" I stared at her. I was wearing my black non-slip sneakers, the same ones I'd worn for months. "Yes," I said. "The stairs were wet." "Wet?" Tessa repeated, eyebrows lifting. "Well, they shouldn't have been. Did you mop them?" "No," I said. My wrist was swelling, and I couldn't curl my fingers without lightning shooting up my arm. "I think I need to go to urgent care." Tessa exhaled like I'd asked her to personally drive me to the moon. "Okay," she said, "but first we need to document. Just a formality." Zach brought the ice in a plastic bag, and as he handed it over, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked ashamed, which, oddly, made me feel worse. Tessa laid the form on the counter and clicked a pen. "So," she said, "write that you lost your balance, that you weren't holding the handrail because your hands were full, and that you declined medical attention at the time." "I didn't decline," I said, holding the ice to my wrist with my good hand. "I'm asking now." Tessa's smile returned, thin as paper. "Right," she said, "but we offered, and you're choosing urgent care later, that's what I mean." She slid the pen toward me. My fingers fumbled with it. The letters on the form blurred. The kitchen felt suddenly too bright, the stainless steel counters gleaming, the overhead lights buzzing. "I don't feel right signing this," I said. "Not like this." Tessa's eyes flicked toward Zach, then back to me, and her voice dropped. "Linda," she said, "this is really simple. You fell. People fall. We don't need drama." Drama, as if pain was theater, as if safety was mood. My cheeks burned. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I set the pen down. "I'm going home," I said. "I'll go to urgent care." Tessa straightened, her posture snapping into managerial authority. "If you leave in the middle of shift," she said, "I'll have to mark it as abandonment." The word hit me like a slap. I looked at Zach, hoping stupidly for some kind of human response. He stared at the floor. My badge swung again as I stood. I could feel it, the plastic edge tapping my sternum like a tiny reminder. "You're real. You're employed. You're supposed to matter. Mark it however you want," I heard myself say, and my voice was calmer than I felt. "I can't work like this." I grabbed my tote with my good hand and walked out of the kitchen with my wrist cradled against my body, my hip aching with every step. On the way out, I passed the front parlor where the quilts were perfect and the radio played a soft trumpet. It was so peaceful in there, like nothing bad could happen in a place that looked like that. That contrast, the curated calm and the ugly little stairwell laughter, made my stomach turn. Outside, the morning air was cold and bright. My breath puffed white. The porch ferns were drooping, and the rocking chairs creaked in the wind. I drove home one-handed, gritting my teeth whenever I had to turn the wheel. In my apartment, the silence met me like a wall. The heater clicked on. The neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one Michael and I had bought at a yard sale, and I took off my badge. The lanyard slid over my head and caught for a second on my hair. I laid it on the table like it was fragile. My photo stared up at me, my smile polite and tired, my name in block letters. I stared at it for a long time. Then, because I didn't know what else to do, I opened my freezer and pressed a bag of peas to my wrist. The cold bit. My hip pulsed. I could feel a bruise blooming. I told myself it wasn't that bad. I told myself I was overreacting. You might roll your eyes at that now, but back then it made sense to me. When you've spent years smoothing things over, at home, at work, and family, you start believing that your job is to absorb discomfort so other people can stay comfortable. A memory flashed, sharp and unwanted, triggered by the lemon cleaner smell still clinging to my sweater. Michael and I, years ago, cleaning our first apartment before his parents visited. He'd been down on his knees scrubbing the kitchen floor with a rag, laughing because I was scolding him for splashing soapy water. "They won't eat off the floor," he'd teased. The smell of cleaner had mixed with his aftershave, and I'd felt so young and bossy and loved. In that memory, if I'd slipped, he would have been there in a second, not laughing but steadying me, saying, Hey, easy." Coming back to my empty kitchen, bag of peas on my swelling wrist, I felt the grief hit like a delayed wave. Not just grief for Michael, grief for the version of me who still expected people to catch her. I drove myself to urgent care later that afternoon, after I'd sat too long trying to decide if I was allowed to go. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Daytime television murmured from a wall-mounted screen. A young mother bounced a baby on her knee. An older man coughed into his fist. When the nurse called my name, I stood too quickly and my hip twinged. The nurse, kind eyes, silver hair in a bun, looked at my wrist and made a sympathetic sound. "That's angry," she said. "How did you do this?" I hesitated, the old reflex rising. "Don't make trouble. Don't complain. Don't be a burden." "I fell," I said. "Downstairs." The nurse's eyebrows lifted. "At home?" she asked, already typing. My badge was in my tote, and I could feel its weight like a secret. My mouth went dry. "At work," I said. Saying it out loud made it real in a new way. The nurse paused, looked at me, and her voice softened. "Okay," she said. Then we're going to document it as a workplace injury. That's important. Important. I hadn't heard that word attached to my experience in a long time. They x-rayed my wrist, sprain, no fracture, but the doctor said the tendons were strained and I needed a brace and rest. He checked my hip, said it was badly bruised but likely not broken, and he asked about my back. He pressed gently along my spine, and I winced in a few spots. "You're lucky," he said. "These stair falls can be nasty." Lucky. I thought of the laughter. I thought of Tessa telling me to write that I declined medical attention. I thought of abandonment. "I need a note," I said, and my voice surprised me with its steadiness. "For work?" The doctor nodded. "I'm writing you out for at least a week," he said. "No lifting, no stairs if you can help it. And you should file workers' comp. Do you have an HR person?" I almost laughed, but it would have come out bitter. "Not really," I said. "It's a small place." The doctor looked at me for a moment like he was weighing something. "Small places still have responsibilities," he said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of taking care of this properly." When I got home, I put the doctor's note on my table next to my badge. It looked strange, those two pieces of paper side by side, one proving my injury, one proving my employment. I made tea with my left hand, clumsy and slow. I sat at the table and stared at my phone. No messages yet. That quiet should have felt like relief, but it felt like the pause before thunder. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "Hey, Linda, hope you're feeling better. Please send a pic of the urgent care note. Also, we need you to come in tomorrow to sign the incident report for the file. Thanks." The exclamation points made my skin crawl. It was that fake brightness people use when they want to pretend nothing happened. I didn't respond right away. I set the phone down and looked at my badge again. The lanyard was slightly frayed where it rubbed against my collar every day. It had been a simple thing, a work accessory. Now it felt like a witness, like it had been there in that stairwell with me, watching their faces. That evening, I did something I'd never done before with work. I opened a folder on my laptop and started saving things. Photos of my wrist brace, a picture of the stairs, because I still had a photo from a month earlier when I'd snapped a shot of the wobbly handrail to show Marcia, joking that it looked like it belonged on a pirate ship. I pulled up my old pay stubs, scrolling through hours and over time. I hadn't looked closely in months. I always assumed it was roughly correct. The next hour was one of those quiet turning points that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. I sat at my kitchen table, my wrist aching, my tea cooling, and I started comparing my scheduled texts from Tessa versus my pay stubs, the times I'd clocked in versus the times listed on paper. The inn used a keycard system for staff doors. We tapped our badges to enter the kitchen after hours, to open the supply closet, to log into the time clock kiosk. I remember that because Tessa had once scolded me for forgetting my badge. "You can't do anything without it, Linda." That night, I realized that badge wasn't just a plastic name. It was a record. And when I started lining things up, texted schedule, my own calendar, the pay stub hours, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a pattern. 10 minutes shaved here, 15 minutes there, a half hour on a Sunday morning, adjusted, because, as Tessa liked to say, you were just chatting with guests anyway. Over months, those little shaves added up. If you've ever had someone treat your time like it's free just because you're kind, You'll recognize the feeling I had then. Not just anger, but a kind of stunned clarity. I'd been thinking my biggest problem was a fall, but the fall was just the moment their mask slipped enough for me to see the whole face. A second memory came, triggered by the sound of my laptop fan whirring, the same steady whir Michael's old desktop used to make when he paid bills online. I saw him at our kitchen table, glasses low on his nose, tapping numbers into a calculator, muttering, "Okay, okay," as if money could be tamed by attention. We weren't rich, but we were careful. Michael used to say, "Small leaks sink ships." I'd laughed at that phrase back then. Sitting alone now, realizing my wages had been leaking out in quiet edits, I felt his words land like a hand on my shoulder. Small leaks. Over time, they drown you. I barely slept that night. My wrist throbbed in its brace, and every time I shifted, my hip reminded me it was bruised like fruit. Around 2 a.m., I got up and walked to the kitchen and picked up my badge. I don't know why. It was just there on the table, and I wanted something solid in my hand. The plastic was cool. My photo looked too cheerful. I thought about the moment on the stairs, the laughter, Tessa's perfume. We don't need drama. I thought about how quickly she'd tried to rewrite the story. She wanted paperwork that said I was careless, that I refused help, that it was my fault. She wanted a version of events that protected her and the inn, and it hit me then, so plainly it almost made me laugh, that she expected me to cooperate in my own erasure. Maybe you've felt that too, that pressure to sign off on someone else's version of you because it's easier for them. I sat back down and made myself a promise, not a dramatic vow, not something movie-worthy, just this. Tomorrow I will tell the truth in a way that leaves a trail. The next morning, I called the number on the urgent care paperwork for workers' comp. A woman with a calm voice took my information. She asked where I worked, what happened, whether my manager had filed an incident report. They handed me a form, I said carefully, but I didn't sign it. They wanted me to say I declined medical attention. There was a pause on the line. "Okay," the woman said, and her tone sharpened in a professional way. "That's good to know. Do you feel safe returning to work?" Safe. That word again. I glanced at my badge, lying beside the phone like it was listening too. "Not right now," I said. "I'm worried they'll retaliate." "Retaliation for reporting a workplace injury is not allowed," she said, and it wasn't just a reassurance, it was a statement of fact. She told me what to do next. Email my manager the doctor's note, keep copies of everything, and if they pressured me to sign anything, I could ask for a copy to review, and I didn't have to do it on the spot. After I hung up, I took a deep breath and forwarded the doctor's note to Tessa. I wrote one sentence. Attached is the urgent care note. This injury occurred at work on the back stairs on Saturday morning. Then I stopped because my hands were shaking and I didn't want to pour emotion into writing. A few minutes later, Tessa called. Her name lit up my screen and my stomach tightened. I let it go to voicemail. My phone buzzed again. A text. "Linda, please answer. We need to clear this up. Also, Mr. Delaney is concerned you're saying it happened at work." Concerned. Not sorry. Not worried about me. Concerned about what I was saying. The storm arrived fast after that. Voicemails. Texts. One message from Zach. "Hey, I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean to laugh. It was like, nervous. Hope you're okay." That apology, awkward as it was, made my eyes sting. Not because it fixed anything, but because it proved something. He knew it was wrong. He knew laughter wasn't the right response. Tessa's next message was different. "We're going to need your badge returned if you're not coming in," she wrote. Policy. I stared at the screen. The badge was mine in the sense that it had my name on it, but I understood what she meant. She wanted the key back. She wanted to cut off my access, my ability to verify logs, my ability to say, "I was there." She wanted to control the narrative and the systems behind it. I set my phone face down, picked up the badge, and held it between my fingers like a coin. Then I did something small and stubborn. I clipped it back around my neck, not because I needed it in my apartment, because I needed to remember I belonged to myself before I belonged to that inn. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I froze, tea mug halfway to my mouth. No one rings my bell midweek. I peered through the peephole. Marcia stood there, holding a grocery bag in one hand and her own phone in the other, her hair pulled back, her face set in that tight expression women get when they've decided something is unfair. Marcia was in her late 20s, a single mom, tough in a quiet way. She cleaned rooms at the inn and moved like she was always a step ahead of chaos. I opened the door, and she looked at my wrist brace and made a sound like she was trying not to curse. "They said you fell because you were being careless," she blurted, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Tessa was telling anyone who would listen. She set the grocery bag on my counter. "I brought you soup stuff, and I brought you this." She held up her phone and tapped the screen. It was a photo, a close-up shot of the stairs, the wet shine on the paint, no caution sign. "I took that this morning," she said, "because I knew they'd try to pretend it was dry." I stared at her, my throat tight. "Marcia," I said, "you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," she cut in. Her eyes flashed. "Because you're not the first. Remember Alma, when she slipped last winter? They said she was clumsy. She quit, and they laughed about her in the kitchen after." My stomach turned. "They laughed?" I whispered. Marcia nodded, jaw clenched. "It's like a joke to them, like we're all characters in their little show." She looked at my badge around my neck. "Don't give that back yet," she said, and her voice dropped. "You know that badge logs your door taps, right?" "I know," I said, and I felt my cheeks warm. "I realized last night?" Marcia leaned on my counter, lowering her voice like she was sharing gossip, but it wasn't gossip. It was survival. "My cousin works at a warehouse," she said. "When somebody got hurt, management tried to make him sign some paper saying it was his fault. He didn't. He reported it. OSHA came. They were not playing." She said OSHA like it was a superhero name. I'd heard of OSHA, of course, but it had always been a distant acronym, something for factories, not a charming bed and breakfast with quilted throws. "I don't want to blow up my job," I said automatically, and even as the words left my mouth, I hated them. Marcia's eyes softened. "Linda," she said, "they already blew up the respect part. You're just deciding if you're going to stand in the rubble and apologize for being there." That sentence, her modern, blunt phrasing, hit me in the chest. If you've ever had a younger woman look at you like she can't believe what you're tolerating, you know how it can wake something up in you. Marcia reached into her bag and pulled out a container of soup. "Eat," she ordered, and then she pointed at my phone. "And stop answering Tessa in your head. Answer her in writing." After Marcia left, the apartment felt different. Not louder, not magically fixed, but steadier. I ate soup. I iced my wrist. I opened my laptop and wrote an email to Tessa and Mr. Delaney together. I attached the doctor's note again. I wrote, "I will not discuss this by phone. Please communicate by email. I am following medical advice and workers' comp guidance." Then, because my hands were trembling but my mind was clear, I added one more line. For the record, the back stairs were wet and lacked proper warning signage. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. That night, I had another memory flash, triggered by the feel of the lanyard against my skin as I lay in bed. It reminded me of Michael's hands on my shoulders the day we moved into our house, our first real house, when we'd carried boxes up narrow stairs and I'd tripped on the top step. I'd been embarrassed, laughing at myself, and Michael had caught my elbow, steady as a post. "I've got you," he'd said, not loudly, just like a fact. I'd felt so safe in that moment, not because nothing bad could happen, but because I wasn't alone in it. Lying in bed now, hearing only the hum of my fridge through the wall, I realized how long I'd been trying to recreate that feeling at work, trying to earn "I've got you" from people who had never planned to offer it. I decided that if I couldn't be caught, I could at least refuse to be mocked while I fell. 2 days later, a letter arrived from the workers' comp carrier with claim information and next steps. The same day, I got an email from Mr. Delaney. Subject line, "Concern." The body was short. "Linda, I'm sorry you're hurt. Tessa tells me you declined assistance and left without completing documentation. We need to close the file properly. Please return your badge and come in to sign the report when you're able." That was it. No question about my wrist. No acknowledgement of the wet stairs. No apology for laughter. Just close the file. They wanted the story wrapped up like a neat bedspread on a guest room bed. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to the workers' comp adjuster. I also did what Marcia suggested. I kept everything in writing. I replied, "I did not decline medical assistance. I requested urgent care and left to seek treatment. I will return my badge after I receive copies of all incident documentation and access logs relating to my badge tap and clock-in that morning." My finger hovered over send. My heart raced. Then I hit it. The next morning, my phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously. "Ms. Hart?" a man's voice said. "This is Raymond Ellis with the Department of Labor and Industry. I received a report of a workplace injury at the Maplewood Inn, and there are a few questions about the incident and the facility. Do you have time to speak?" I sat down slowly, my stomach flipping. The investigation had a voice now. "Yes," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. He asked me to describe what happened. I told him the truth. Not dramatized, not embellished. Wet stairs, no sign. Wobbly handrail, laughter. Pressure to sign a form that didn't reflect what happened. He asked if there had been prior incidents on those stairs. "I know of at least one," I said, thinking of Alma. I told him about the handrail complaints. He asked if I'd ever received safety training. I almost laughed again, but it wasn't funny. "No," I said. "We mostly learn by being told not to mess up." He paused. "Okay," he said. "Thank you. An inspector may visit the site." After I hung up, my hands shook so hard I had to set my phone down. Maybe you're listening and thinking, "Linda, why does this scare you? It's just rules. It's just safety." But when you've spent your whole life trying to be seen as easy and pleasant, the idea of being the person who triggers an inspection feels like you're committing a social crime. It shouldn't, but it does. That's how systems of entitlement survive, by making the person who speaks up feel rude. That afternoon, Tessa showed up at my apartment. I don't know how she got my address so easily, but of course she had it in my employment file. The doorbell rang, and I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there in a beige coat, hair perfect, smile ready. My first instinct was to pretend I wasn't home. Then I remembered my promise: leave a trail. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain latched. "Hi," Tessa chirped. "I was in the area. I just wanted to check on you." Her eyes flicked to my wrist brace and then to my face, as if gauging whether I looked convincingly injured. "I'm following doctor's orders," I said. "We can communicate by email." Tessa's smile tightened. "Linda," she said, lowering her voice, "you're making this bigger than it needs to be." "I didn't make anything wet," I replied, and I surprised myself with how flat my voice sounded. Tessa blinked, as if she hadn't expected me to speak in complete sentences. "We're all stressed," she said quickly. "It was a busy morning. People laughed because they were shocked. You know how it is." I thought of my body hitting those steps. I thought of her perfume in my face while she asked about my shoes. "No," I said. "I don't know how it is to laugh at someone on the floor." Tessa's cheeks colored. "That's not fair," she snapped, and the sweetness drained out of her voice like someone pulled a plug. "We're not monsters. You're turning this into a personal attack." "I'm turning it into the truth," I said. My badge was around my neck, tucked under my sweatshirt, and I could feel it against my skin like a small, steady weight. Tessa's eyes narrowed, and then she shifted tactics, cooler, strategic. "Mr. Delaney is worried about your state of mind," she said slowly. "After your husband passed, you've been emotional sometimes. We just want to make sure you're okay. Maybe you misheard. Maybe you misunderstood the laughter." There it was, the narrative they'd use if they needed to. She's confused. She's grieving. She's not reliable. If you've ever felt someone try to paint you as unstable so they don't have to address what they did, you'll understand the quiet fury that rose in me then. "Tessa," I said, and my voice didn't shake, "I remember what happened. I remember it clearly, and I'm not discussing my husband with you." Her nostrils flared. For a moment she looked genuinely angry, like my boundaries were an insult. Then she forced a smile again, bright and false. "Okay," she said. "Well, just think about what you're doing. Investigations can get messy. People lose jobs. It's a small town. You don't want to be that person." I held her gaze through the crack in my door. "I didn't want to be the person on the floor either," I said quietly. But here we are. Tessa's smile froze. She took a step back, coat swishing. "Return your badge," she said, and now her voice was pure manager. "Company property." "When I have copies of my records," I said, "email me." I closed the door gently, not slamming it, but firmly enough that the chain rattled. My legs went weak after. I leaned against the door, heart pounding, and I realized something. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't begged. I hadn't apologized for having needs. That was a new feeling, and it felt like standing on solid ground after slipping for months. 2 days later, Marcia texted me. "OSHA is here," like actual inspectors with clipboards. "Tessa looks like she swallowed a bee." I stared at the message, a strange mix of dread and relief washing through me. My badge lay on the table beside my phone, the lanyard curled like a resting snake. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. For years, I'd worn it like a sign that I belonged. Now it felt like evidence, like a key I hadn't realized I had. The inspector called me later that afternoon. "Ms. Hart," he said, "we visited the Maplewood Inn today. We noted several potential hazards, including the back staircase condition and lack of warning signage. We'll be following up with management. Do you have any documentation you can provide?" My mouth went dry. I opened the folder on my laptop where I'd saved everything. "Yes," I said. "I have photos. I have my scheduled texts. I have pay stubs." "Pay stubs," he repeated. "That may be outside our scope, but you can share it with the Labor Department if needed. Please send us the stair photos." When I hung up, I sat very still. The word investigation had always sounded dramatic to me, like something on television. But this was just men in practical shoes looking at a wet staircase and taking it seriously. It was the system doing what it was supposed to do when someone insisted on the truth. And suddenly, in my mind, I saw the stairwell again. But this time, instead of laughter bouncing off the walls, I imagined silence. I imagined someone saying, "Are you hurt?" and meaning it. That should have been normal. It had never been normal there. The next week was a blur of paperwork and aching joints. Workers' comp scheduled me for a follow-up. My wrist improved slowly, like a stubborn child. Bruises faded from purple to yellow. But my anger didn't fade. It clarified. More emails came from Mr. Delaney, each one polite on the surface and sharp underneath. "We have to consider staffing needs. We can't hold your position indefinitely. Please return company property." I replied only in writing, brief, factual. I requested my time records. I requested the incident report copy. I requested the badge access logs. They ignored those requests and kept demanding the badge. Then, one morning, a certified letter arrived. My hand shook as I signed for it. Inside was a formal notice. Failure to return company property may result in termination. I sat at my table, the letter in front of me, my badge beside it, and I felt an old familiar fear creep in, the fear of losing income, of being labeled trouble, of being alone. I thought, what if they fire me? What if no one hires a 52-year-old with a wrist brace? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm being dramatic? That was when the third memory flash came, triggered by the click of my heater turning on, the same click our old furnace used to make when Michael and I were scraping by after he got laid off one winter. We'd sat at our table, bills spread out, and Michael had said, "We'll figure it out. We always do." I'd believed him because we were a team in the real sense, not the corporate slogan sense. Coming back to my lonely apartment, I realized I'd been trying to recreate "we'll figure it out" by being useful to people who benefited from my fear. I took a slow breath and opened my laptop. I emailed the Labor Department about wage discrepancies, attaching my comparisons. I emailed the inspector the stair photos. I emailed the workers' comp adjuster the certified letter, noting the pressure to return my badge before receiving my records. Then I did something practical. I called a local employment lawyer, not because I wanted a big lawsuit, but because I wanted to understand my rights. The lawyer's receptionist was kind. She scheduled a consult. When I sat in that lawyer's small office a week later, my badge in my purse like a talisman, I felt strange, like I was in trouble for being there. The lawyer, a woman about my age with a no-nonsense haircut, flipped through my printed emails and pay stub notes. "They're trying to control the story," she said, tapping the paper with her pen. "That's why they want your badge back. It's not about plastic. It's about access and records." I swallowed. "I don't want to ruin anyone," I said. Because that's what women like me say, even when we're the ones being ruined. The lawyer looked at me over her glasses. Linda, she said gently, holding someone accountable isn't ruin, it's reality. Then she gave me a simple plan. Respond to the certified letter with a formal request for records again. Offer to return the badge via certified mail once those are produced, and document any retaliation. Also, she added, if you want to talk about wage theft, keep those comparisons. That's separate, but it matters. I walked out of her office into the crisp air feeling lighter, not because my life was magically fixed, but because someone had finally spoken to me like I was sane, like I wasn't just a sweet older lady making drama, like I was a worker with rights. The investigation moved faster than I expected. 2 weeks after the inspector visit, Marcia called me breathless. Linda, she said, they shut down the back stairs, like taped off. They put signs everywhere. Mr. Delaney is freaking out because guests can see it. I closed my eyes. Good, I whispered. They should see it. And Tessa? Marcia's voice held a note of satisfaction. She's being so nice now, calling everyone ma'am. I almost smiled, but it came out sad. It shouldn't take inspectors for basic decency. That same day, Mr. Delaney finally emailed me the incident report copy. It was creative. It described me as rushing and ignoring safety protocols. It stated, I declined immediate medical attention and left voluntarily. It didn't mention wet stairs. It didn't mention laughter. My hands shook as I read it. The lie sat there in black and white. I forwarded it to the adjuster and the lawyer. Then I replied to Mr. Delaney. This report contains inaccuracies. I did not decline medical attention. I requested it. The stairs were wet and lacked warning signage. I will provide my statement in writing. I attached my own statement, plain and factual, including the detail that staff laughed. I hesitated before including that line. It felt petty compared to wet stairs and wages. But then I thought, no, laughter matters. It reveals culture. It reveals how they see us. So I included it. The incoming storm after that was louder. Tessa sent a barrage of texts. Why are you doing this? We could have handled this internally. You're making us look bad. Mr. Delaney called twice and left voicemails that sounded like a man trying to sound reasonable while holding a threat in his mouth. Linda, he said, we're a small business. These fines could destroy us. Think about the other employees. That line, think about the other employees, was meant to make me feel guilty for protecting them. I listened to the voicemail, then deleted it after saving a copy. I made tea. I sat at my table. I held my badge in my hand and ran my thumb over the raised letters of my name. For years, I'd let that name be spoken in a tone that made it smaller. Not anymore. The first real power shift happened at a place I'd never imagined. A meeting room at the state labor office. My wage complaint had triggered an inquiry, and they asked me to come in with documentation. The building was plain, fluorescent lit, the kind of place with scuffed floors and plastic chairs. I sat in one of those chairs, wrist brace off for the moment, but my hand still tender, and I felt nervous in a way I hadn't felt since my driver's test at 16. A young investigator, maybe 30, sat across from me with a laptop and a calm face. Ms. Hart, she said, walk me through your hours. I slid my folder across the table. Inside were printouts of my schedule texts, my own calendar notes, pay stubs with highlighted discrepancies. I'd also printed something else, a screenshot of the inn's time clock portal showing my badge ID number because one of the younger staff had helped me access it before Tessa revoked my login. Zach, quiet Zach. He'd sent me the link late one night with a message. I don't think what they're doing is right. The investigator reviewed the papers, then looked up. These edits, she said, tapping a highlighted section. They're consistent. This isn't one mistake. I felt my throat tighten. No, I said. It's how it's been. She nodded slowly. We'll request records from the employer, she said. If they don't comply, that becomes its own issue. I exhaled, shaky. The investigator's tone wasn't dramatic. It was matter of fact. And that was the most satisfying part. She was treating my experience like data, like something real, not like drama. When I left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt taller, like my spine remembered it could hold me up. The confrontation I dreaded came not from Tessa this time, but from Mr. Delaney himself. He showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon, not dressed in his usual inn-owner's sweater vest, but in a heavy coat, his face pinched with irritation. I opened the door without the chain this time, because I refused to live like I was hiding. He stepped inside, eyes scanning my small space, as if measuring it against the inn's polished rooms. "Linda," he said, forcing a smile, "you look well." I gestured toward my wrist. "I'm healing," I said. He nodded, then sighed dramatically, and sat at my kitchen table without being invited. He placed a folder on the table. My badge lay nearby, and his eyes flicked to it. "We need to resolve this," he said, voice low. "This has gone too far. Inspectors, labor inquiries. Do you understand what this does to a business?" I looked at him, really looked. His hands were soft. His nails were clean. He'd never scrubbed a toilet at 6 a.m. He'd never carried laundry down those stairs. He'd never slipped. "I understand what it does to a body," I said quietly. Mr. Delaney's jaw tightened. "We're prepared to offer you a settlement," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "A severance, in exchange for returning your badge and signing a release. You walk away with money, we move on, no more complications." I didn't open the folder. I didn't even touch it. "So you want me to disappear?" I said. He frowned. "That's not—" "You want me to sign something that makes this convenient for you?" I continued. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "You're calling it a settlement. I'm hearing a hush order." He leaned forward, tone sharpening. "Linda," he said, "people are laughing about this. They're saying you're bitter, that you're trying to get paid because you're lonely." Lonely. The insult was so old-fashioned, it almost made me smile. It was the kind of thing people assume about older women, that will do anything for attention. I rested my good hand on my badge. The plastic edge pressed into my palm, grounding me. "They laughed when I fell down the stairs," I said, and my voice didn't crack. "I'm not interested in what they're laughing about now. I'm interested in what's true." Mr. Delaney sat back, blinking. For a moment, he looked genuinely thrown off, like he'd expected tears or bargaining. "Tessa told me you're being influenced," he said cautiously, "by other employees, by people who don't understand how businesses work." I thought of Marcia's face, of Zach's late-night link, of the nurse at urgent care saying, "important." "No," I said. "I'm being supported. There's a difference." He exhaled sharply. "Fine," he snapped. "Then let's be frank. Return the badge. Sign the release, or you're done here." My stomach tightened. That old fear rose again. Loss of income, loss of routine, loss of identity. Then I realized He was threatening to take away a job that had been taking away pieces of me for years. "Okay," I said simply. "Then I'm done." He stared at me. "You can't just—" "I can," I said, and my voice surprised me with its calm. "I won't sign a release. I will return the badge via certified mail once I receive all records requested by the Labor Department and Workers' Comp. If you want to communicate further, do it in writing." He sat there a moment longer, as if waiting for me to backpedal. When I didn't, he stood abruptly, chair scraping. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "Maybe," I said, "but it's mine." He grabbed his folder, stormed out, and slammed my door hard enough to rattle the frame. I stood in the quiet afterward, heart racing, and I realized I was smiling, not because confrontation feels good, but because I'd finally stopped negotiating my own dignity. The public payoff came in the most Maplewood way possible, a community rumor storm. The inn was a small-town landmark, and when the back staircase got taped off and inspectors came through, people noticed. A local Facebook group posted, "Anyone know what's going on at Maplewood Inn? Looks like some kind of safety issue." Comments piled up, speculation, jokes, defensiveness. Someone wrote, probably someone trying to scam them. Someone else wrote, "I worked there once. Not surprised." I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself in the town square of the internet. I just watched, feeling that strange dual sensation of being exposed and invisible at the same time. Then, one morning, Marcia sent me a screenshot, a post from Mr. Delaney himself. "We are temporarily closing for renovations to improve safety and guest experience," it read. Renovations. That word made me laugh for the first time in weeks, a real laugh, because it was such a polite way to describe being forced to fix what should have been fixed before someone got hurt. But I wasn't laughing at pain. I was laughing at the fact that truth, stubborn and slow, was still capable of rearranging the world. A week later, the Labor Department investigator called. "Ms. Hart," she said, "we've reviewed the employer's records. There are discrepancies consistent with your documentation. We're pursuing corrective action." Corrective action. I didn't ask what that meant exactly. I just thanked her, voice thick. Then she added, "I want you to know this matters beyond you. Other employees may be owed wages, too." I sat down, tears pricking my eyes. I thought of Alma quitting after her fall. I thought of Marcia raising a child on wages that might have been quietly shaved. I thought of all the times I'd accepted close enough because I didn't want to make a fuss. If you're listening and you've ever swallowed something that felt wrong because you didn't want to be difficult, I hope you hear this part. Sometimes the fuss is the point. Sometimes the fuss is the only thing that changes anything. The last time I brought my badge into the story as a tool was the day I mailed it back. I waited until my lawyer confirmed the Labor Department had requested records and that my return could not be framed as refusal. I took a small padded envelope, slid the badge inside, and before sealing it, I held it one last time. The lanyard was worn where it had rubbed against my neck through seasons of early mornings. The plastic sleeve was scratched. My photo looked like a woman who was trying to look agreeable. I ran my thumb over my name. Linda Hart. Then I did something small and private. I took a pen and wrote the date on the back of the badge sleeve in tiny letters. Just for me. The day I fell. The day they laughed. A marker in time. Then I sealed the envelope, addressed it to the inn, and paid extra for tracking and signature. When the postal clerk slid it into the outgoing bin, I felt a surprising pang, like letting go of a piece of my routine. But beneath that pang was something steadier, relief. The key was no longer around my neck. The door was no longer mine to enter, and that meant their power over my day-to-day life had limits now. The weeks after were not some sparkling montage of victory. I had bills. I had long afternoons where my wrist ached and my mind replayed the stairwell. I had moments of guilt so strong it felt like nausea. But I also had quiet mornings where I sat by my window with coffee and realized no one was barking orders at me. No one was accusing me of being forgetful. No one was demanding I smile through disrespect. I applied for jobs carefully. I updated my resume for the first time in years. I felt the familiar sting of ageism in subtle ways. We're looking for someone with a more energetic vibe, one interviewer said, and I knew exactly what she meant. But then something unexpected happened. The public library, downtown, posted a listing for a part-time circulation assistant. It wasn't glamorous. It was steady. It had predictable hours. It had a supervisor who talked to me like a human being. In the interview, the director, a woman with kind eyes and gray streaks in her hair, asked why I left my last job. I took a breath and said, "A safety issue." I didn't pour out the story. I didn't apologize. I just told the truth in a simple sentence. She nodded, as if that made sense. "We take safety seriously here," she said, "and kindness." Kindness. Imagine that being part of a job description. I got the position. My first day at the library, they handed me a new badge. It was different. Laminated paper with the library logo clipped to a retractable reel. I held it and felt something twist in my chest. For a moment, I almost didn't want it. Badges suddenly seemed like leashes. But then I realized the object wasn't the problem. The culture was. The way people used systems to control instead of support, that was the problem. I clipped the library badge on and thought, this one is not a trap. This one is just a tool. The final memory flash came a few months later, on a rainy afternoon when I was shelving books and someone's phone ringtone went off, an old jazz tune that Michael used to love. The sound hit me like a gentle shove into the past. I saw him in our living room, tapping his fingers on his knee, smiling that soft smile he had when a song reminded him life could be good even when it was hard. I stood there between shelves, a book in my hand, and I felt grief and gratitude braided together. I realized something. Michael didn't love me because I was useful. He loved me because I was me. Somewhere along the way after he died, I'd gotten twisted around, thinking my usefulness was my worth. The Maplewood Inn had fed that confusion. The stairwell laughter had exposed it. I went home that night and made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce. But I ate it at my table with a candle lit, like I mattered. A few months after that, Marcia stopped by my apartment again, this time smiling. "They paid," she said simply. "They're doing back paychecks. People are getting money, even Zach." My throat tightened. "Are you?" I asked. She nodded. "Yep," she said, "and they put a real handrail in, like a sturdy one, not that wobble thing." We stood in my kitchen, and for a moment I felt the strange satisfaction of consequences. Not revenge, not cruelty, just the world being corrected in small ways. Money returned, safety fixed, lies exposed. Marcia looked at me, eyes shining. "You know what's wild?" she said. "Tessa quit. Like, she didn't get fired, but she left. Couldn't handle everyone looking at her different." I exhaled slowly. I thought of Tessa in my doorway, telling me I didn't want to be that person. Maybe she'd been right in her own twisted way. I had become that person, the one who didn't swallow it, the one who made people uncomfortable enough to change. And if you've ever been tempted to shrink because someone might call you difficult, I want you to hear this. Sometimes being that person is the only way the stairs get fixed. The epilogue for me wasn't a courthouse victory or a dramatic speech. It was a quiet afternoon in my apartment, sunlight slanting through the blinds, when I opened a small drawer in my desk and found the old Maplewood badge lanyard. I'd kept it after mailing the badge itself back, just the worn fabric loop, because it was mine, because it had been around my neck through a chapter of my life. I held it, feeling the fray under my fingers, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt awareness. That lanyard had started as a symbol of belonging when I was raw with grief. It had become a witness to disrespect. It had become a kind of silent ally when I needed records and proof. And now, in my drawer, it was a reminder that my identity can't be printed on plastic and controlled by someone else. I folded it neatly and placed it back, not as a trophy, but as a marker. This is where my patience ended and my self-respect began. Maybe you're listening from your own kitchen table, your own quiet room, and you're thinking about the things you've let slide because you didn't want to cause a fuss. Maybe you've laughed something off when it wasn't funny, just to keep the peace. I'm not here to tell you to go wage war on your life. I'm just here to say, softly, from one woman to another, that your pain deserves dignity, your time deserves honesty, and if someone laughs when you're down, it tells you something important about what they think you're worth. You don't have to accept their math. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you, truly, from my heart. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, what city or town, what corner of the world you're in while you hear my voice. Leave it in the comments so we can feel a little less alone. And if you enjoy these real-life stories and you'd like to help me keep sharing them, you can tap that Super Thanks button on YouTube. It's a small gesture that supports this channel more than you might realize. On your screen, you should see a couple more stories I think you might connect with if you want to stay with me a little longer. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, be gentle with yourselves, and please, watch your step, and also watch who laughs when you stumble.